I'm not buying the horse. I'm buying you. Mountain Man told the fat girl at auction, best choice ever. I'm not buying the horse. I'm buying you. The words cut through the roar of the Riverside horse market like a gunshot. For a heartbeat, the crowd froze. Men turned. Women stopped whispering. Even the Appaloosa stallion on the auction block tossed his head as if he understood something had just shifted. Abigail Hartley's heart slammed against her ribs. She stood not beside the horses, but on a raised wooden platform at the very back of the yard, wrists bound in front with a rough hemp rope, her gray dress pulled tight across her round belly and full hips, every soft curve exposed under the cruel noon sun. Sweat clung to her skin. Shame burned hotter. She kept her head down, brown hair falling like a curtain to hide her face. It didn't stop the words. Too fat to ride, too slow to work. Her daddy should be the one up there, not her. Look at those arms. She'd eat more than she earns. Each comment landed like a slap. The horse trader, Samuel Blackwell, stood beside her, smiling as if he were selling a prime mare instead of a desperate woman. "Abigail Hartley," he called, voice slick. 25 years old, strong back, can cook, clean, and work. Her father owes me $200. I am selling the terms of her labor to settle his debt. 10 years' service. Who will make the first offer? A few men snickered. One lifted a hand lazily. She's not worth feeding for 10 years. $50. 50? Another laughed. I wouldn't take her if you paid me. Look at her. She'll break a wagon just by sitting in it. The crowd roared. Abigail bit the inside of her cheek so hard she tasted blood. She had promised herself she would not cry. Not here. Not while every eye in Riverside watched Thomas Hartley's daughter pay for his sins. Her father was nowhere to be seen. Of course he isn't, she thought bitterly. He'd probably found a saloon and a bottle by now. Samuel spread his hands. Come now, gentlemen. You've all seen her work in town. She's strong, obedient, never talks back. $100. That's all I'm asking. No one moved, and then the air shifted. Nathaniel Cordell stepped into the circle. Nate was impossible to miss, even in a packed horse market. 6'3", broad-shouldered from years of hauling timber and iron, long brown hair tied at his neck, beard thick around a hard jaw. His eyes, the clear blue of a Wyoming sky after a storm, swept the scene once, taking everything in. The Appaloosa stallion snorted and pawed the dirt in his pen nearby. The horse was magnificent, glossy black coat, white spotted rump, muscles coiled with power. Men had come from 3 towns over just to see him. Everyone knew Nate Cordell was here for that horse. Samuel brightened. Cordell, you're just in time. Thunder is ready for you, finest stallion west of the Rockies. Nate looked at the horse, checked the legs, the chest, the eyes. The crowd leaned in, and then he turned his back on the stallion and faced the platform where Abigail stood. How much for her contract? He asked. Murmurs rippled outward. Samuel blinked. For the girl? For her? Nate repeated, voice flat. Not the horse. Blackwell, you're telling me she's worth less than that horse? Someone jeered. At least the horse is nice to look at. Laughter rolled again. Abigail flinched. Samuel recovered quickly. For you, Cordell, $100. Nate's gaze settled on Abigail at last. He saw the tears she tried to hide. The rope burns on her wrists, the way she held herself small as if shrinking might make her disappear. Something in his chest twisted, sharp and unexpected. 150, he said. Samuel nearly choked. You're offering more?" "I'm not buying the horse," Nate said, eyes never leaving Abigail's face. "I'm buying her." For the first time, she looked up. Their gazes met, her brown eyes wide with terror and disbelief, his steady and unreadable. The crowd laughed, whispered, gaped, but for a brief, blistering moment it felt like there were only two people in the whole dusty yard. If you're listening to this right now, from a tiny room, a crowded bus, or somewhere far from these mountains, tell me in the comments where you are in the world. Because what happens after this man chooses the fat girl over the finest horse in Wyoming will change both of their lives in ways neither of them expects. Abigail Hartley had never seen so many backs turn at once. When Samuel Blackwell announced her name, she felt the shift like a cold wind across the yard. Men who'd joked with her in the bakery last winter looked away. Women who'd once borrowed sugar from her mother's kitchen whispered behind gloved hands. No one met her eyes. It hadn't always been like this. Once, Abigail had been Abby from the Hartley place, the girl who baked the best cinnamon bread in Riverside, the one who laughed too loud at church picnics and danced with any boy brave enough to ask her. She'd been soft then, too, round cheeks, full arms, a generous waist, but her mother used to kiss that softness and call it a woman built for comfort, not for breaking. Then her mother died. Then the gambling started. Then everything else followed. Thomas Hartley had been a decent man once, or so people liked to say. After his wife's death, the decent parts drained out of him, pint by pint, card game by card game. He stopped seeing Abigail as his daughter and started seeing her as a burden with a good pair of working hands. "Men don't want a girl who takes up as much space as two," he'd sneered one night, drunk at the kitchen table. "You eat half the pantry, and what do I get for it? Nothing. You should have come out a son." Abigail had learned to move quietly after that, to eat standing over the sink so he wouldn't see, to work until her back screamed just to avoid his fists and his disappointment. When he lost $200 to Samuel Blackwell in a single night of cards, he came home with a look that made her stomach twist. "I can't pay him," he'd said, not meeting her eyes, "but I can offer 10 years of service. You're strong. You'll work it off." "Father," she'd whispered, heart pounding, "you can't mean—" His hand had cracked across her cheek. "You think you're too good to earn your keep?" he roared. "You think anyone else would take a fat, useless girl like you?" She'd gone numb after that. The day Samuel led her into town, rope around her wrists, Abigail had walked like a woman in a dream. The platform felt higher than any scaffold, the air thinner. Every insult sliced another piece off her. She'd tried just once to speak. "I can work off the debt here," she'd begged Samuel. "I'll clean your house, your stables, anything." He'd smiled, patronizing. "You're worth more sold than kept, sweetheart." Worth more sold. Now, standing on the platform while Nate Cordell stared at her like she was something other than a joke, Abigail didn't know what to do with the flicker of heat that bloomed in her chest. It felt a little like hope. It terrified her. Samuel recovered from his shock with practiced charm. $150 it is, then," he called out, raising his hands as if he'd done something noble. "Going once, going twice." "Are you serious, Cordell?" a rancher scoffed. "You could have had that stallion. You're going to pay more for 10 years with that than for a lifetime with Thunder?" Nate didn't bother to look at him. "I said what I said." Samuel's eyes glittered. "Sold to Mr. Nathaniel Cordell." The rope bit into Abigail's wrists as Samuel jerked her closer to untie the knot. His fingers dug in harder than necessary. "You better be useful for him," he muttered under his breath. "You weren't worth half this to your own father." Abigail's stomach clenched. Did my father at least clear his debt?" "Oh, that," Samuel smirked. "He cleared it the moment he signed you over. You just made me profit." She swayed. Nate stepped up onto the platform just as Samuel yanked the rope free. Up close he seemed even larger, all shadow and scar and restrained power. Abigail tried to shrink herself, to become small enough he might forget he'd just bought 10 years of her life with a single, steady sentence. He surprised her. Instead of grabbing her arm and dragging her down, he lifted the rope from her wrists carefully and let it fall to the boards. "You're done tying her," he said quietly to Samuel. "Understand?" Samuel laughed nervously. "She's yours now. Do what you like with her." Nate's jaw flexed. "That's exactly what worries me about men like you." Abigail stared at him wide-eyed. Men like you. It was such a small thing. But no one had separated her from the men who hurt her before. She'd always been lumped with them. Another mistake. Another bad decision. Nate stepped down first, then held a hand up to her. Not forceful, just there, waiting. Habits pulled at her. The habit of flinching, of expecting pain, of refusing help because she'd been taught she didn't deserve it. But the crowd was watching, every eye sharp and curious, waiting to see how the fat girl would stumble. Abigail lifted her chin and took his hand. His grip was firm and steady, heat seeping into her cold fingers as he helped her down from the platform. For one dizzy second, when her feet hit the dirt and the world rocked, he caught her by the waist to keep her upright. Gasp, whisper, snicker. "Careful, Cordell," someone called. "She'll crush you if you're not steady." Nate turned his head just enough that the man saw his eyes. The laughter died. He led Abigail through the parting crowd toward a bay gelding tied near the fence. Murmurs followed them like buzzing flies. Cordell's lost his mind. Wasted 50 more than she's worth. Should have bought the horse instead. Abigail swallowed hard. "You don't have to do this," she whispered, voice small. "You can tell him you made a mistake. Samuel, he'll take me back, sell me to someone else." Nate tightened the strap on his saddle, then looked at her over the horse's back. "I don't make mistakes at auctions," he said. "I'm not worth $150, she blurted, cheeks burning. "I'm not worth half that." His eyes, impossibly blue, held hers for a long moment. "That's not your decision to make," he replied quietly. "And it sure as hell isn't theirs." He swung into the saddle and offered his hand again. "Come on, we've got 2 days' ride ahead." Abigail stared at his hand, then at the road stretching out of town. Behind her, Riverside muttered and laughed and forgot. In front of her, the mountains waited, wild, unknown, terrifying. So did this man who had chosen her over the best horse in Wyoming. She placed her hand in his. He pulled her up behind him, settling her carefully so she wouldn't slip. Her fingers hovered, unsure, before lightly catching his coat for balance. He clicked the reins. As the town shrank behind them, Abigail dared one last question, barely more than a breath against his back. "Why me?" Nate didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, the words were low, rough-edged. "Because I've buried one good woman the world didn't deserve," he said. "I'm not going to leave another one on a block to be sold like a broken wagon." Abigail pressed her lips together to keep from sobbing. The horse carried them toward the mountains. And for the first time in her life, someone had chosen her in front of everyone and hadn't taken it back. The world changed the moment they left Riverside behind. The shouts, the laughter, the sting of Samuel Blackwell's words, all of it faded until the only sounds left were the steady thud of hooves on dirt and the soft whisper of wind through prairie grass. Abigail sat stiff at first, terrified of doing anything wrong. She kept her hands light on Nate's coat, barely touching him unless the horse stumbled. But Nate rode like the mountains were an extension of his own body. Steady, unhurried, calm. It made her shoulders loosen bit by bit. By late afternoon, they were miles from town. The land began to rise beneath them, rolling hills shifting toward the jagged shapes of the Wind River Range, their peaks pale against the sky. Nate pulled to a stop near a stream where cottonwoods shivered gold with autumn. "We'll camp here," he said. "Horse needs water, and so do you." Abigail nodded, even though her throat felt too tight to speak. When she slid off the saddle, her legs nearly buckled. Nate caught her elbow before she hit the ground. "Easy," he murmured. "You're tired." "I'm fine," she whispered, embarrassed. "You're exhausted," he corrected gently. "You don't have to pretend otherwise." No one had ever said that like it wasn't an accusation. She didn't know how to respond. While Abigail knelt by the stream, splashing cool water over her face, Nate unpacked the saddlebags with efficient strength. Bedrolls, cooking pots, a small canvas tent. He worked silently, but not impatiently, as though he'd done this routine 1,000 times. When she stood to help, he looked over his shoulder. "Sit. Rest." "I want to help," she said, voice small. "You will," he replied. "But after you catch your breath?" Abigail sank onto a fallen log and watched him move. Nate Cordell didn't waste anything. Not steps, not words, not strength. Every motion was deliberate, controlled. And though he wasn't smiling, he didn't look angry, not like her father always had when she was near. It was unsettling, this quiet kindness. By sunset, a fire crackled between them. Nate handed her a tin bowl with steaming rabbit stew, the scent of herbs drifting warm through the evening chill. Abigail held it with both hands, letting the heat seep into her fingers. "You made this?" she asked. "Made it while you were resting." She blinked. "For me?" "For us," he corrected. "Eat." She took a small spoonful, hesitant at first. The flavor hit her tongue, rich, savory, comforting in a way she hadn't expected, and her eyes burned. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until now. For a moment she forgot herself and ate faster, grateful, desperate. Then she froze, too fast, too much, greedy. Her father's voice rose in her head like a ghost. "No wonder you're fat. You eat like a starved horse." Her hands trembled. Nate noticed immediately. "What's wrong?" I shouldn't." She swallowed hard. "I don't want you to think I'm overeating." His brow furrowed. "Overeating? Abigail, you haven't had a proper meal in days." "But still—" Shame crawled up her throat. People always said I ate too much." "People," Nate said, voice low and controlled, "talk too much about things they don't understand." She blinked, startled. He continued, gentler this time. "Eat what you need. You're not being judged here." Something inside her, wound tight for years, loosened a fraction. By the time she finished the bowl, warmth spread through her limbs, and the trembling had stopped. Nate handed her a blanket and pointed toward the tent he'd set up beneath a cluster of pines. "You'll sleep in there," he said. Plenty of room. I'll stay by the fire. You're sleeping outside? She asked, startled. I've slept outside more nights than inside. I'll be fine. But it's cold. It's colder in the mountains, he replied simply. Better you're rested for tomorrow. Abigail hesitated. Why are you being so kind to me? He met her eyes across the fire, the flames reflecting blue in his gaze. Because someone should have been, he said quietly, long before today. No one had ever spoken that truth aloud. Her throat closed around a sound she wasn't sure was a sob or a thank you. She ducked her head, retreating to the tent before emotion broke her completely. But later, hours after Nate's breathing steadied into the slow rhythm of sleep, Abigail crept to the tent flap and peeked out. He wasn't asleep at all. He sat with his back against a pine trunk, rifle across his knees, eyes scanning the dark woods like he expected danger in every shadow. His posture was relaxed but not careless. He wasn't protecting himself. He was protecting her. The knowledge sent a sharp, unfamiliar ache through her chest. She watched him for a long moment before crawling back to bed. The second day of travel carried them deeper into the mountains. The air grew cooler, the path steeper. Abigail's body protested, her thighs burned, her back ached, and every bump in the trail jarred her. But Nate checked on her often. You holding up? Yes. Tell me if you need to stop. I don't want to slow you down. You won't. And somehow, she believed him. That evening, when they stopped beside a grove of aspens glowing gold, Nate surprised her by speaking first. You asked yesterday why I chose you, he said quietly, stirring the fire. Not the horse. Abigail's breath caught. He didn't look at her. Thunder's strong, but he's just muscle and bone, replaceable. A good horse is worth a lot, but there are others like him. He finally lifted his gaze. There isn't another you. Her heart thudded painfully against her ribs. You don't even know me. No, he agreed softly. But I saw enough on that platform to know you weren't meant for the life they were selling you into. She didn't know how to hold those words. They were too heavy, too gentle, too much. Nate, her voice broke. What happens when we reach your cabin? He tossed another log into the fire, sparks rising like stars. Then, he said, we figure out what you want, not what someone else decides. Abigail stared at him, unable to speak. For the first time in her life, the road ahead didn't look like a sentence. It looked like a beginning. By the time the cabin came into view, Abigail no longer trusted her own eyes. For 2 days, she had imagined something crude. 4 walls barely holding against the wind, a leaking roof, a pile of furs in the corner for sleeping. That was how mountain men were always described in town gossip. Wild, half-feral, living closer to wolves than to people. But Nate's cabin, it rose from the clearing like a fortress built by patience and grief. Massive logs, hand-hewn and fitted tight. A stone chimney climbing the height of the cabin like a spine of granite. Wide windows, real windows, with shutters and carved frames. A split-rail fence wound around the yard, enclosing a garden with late-season vegetables still clinging to life. Farther back, she saw a chicken coop, a small barn, and stacks of firewood split neatly and covered against the snow. This wasn't a shelter. It was a life. Abigail's breath caught. Nate, did you build all of this? Most of it, he said, guiding the horse toward the hitching post. Cabin was half finished when I bought the land. I've finished the rest over the years. It's beautiful. He didn't answer, but something softened in his eyes before he looked away. When she slid off the horse, her legs were trembling again, part exhaustion, part awe. Nate steadied her without comment. Then he opened the front door, stepping aside so she could enter first. Warmth rushed over her. The main room glowed with firelight. A huge stone hearth dominated the left wall, a heavy iron pot hanging above the flames. The smell of pine sap, smoke, and something faintly sweet, dried lavender maybe, wrapped around her like a blanket. A handmade table stood in the center of the room, its surface polished smooth. 2 chairs, a long bench. On the far side, a small kitchen area held shelves lined with jars of herbs, beans, flour, salt, and dried fruit. Everything was orderly, clean, cared for. This was no bachelor's shack. This was someone's home. Abigail didn't move. She couldn't. Her throat tightened and her vision blurred as the weight of it settled on her. No one had ever brought her home before. Nate studied her quietly. "You okay?" She nodded, though tears had begun slipping down her cheeks. "It's just, I didn't expect—" She swallowed. "Nothing in my life has ever looked like this." He didn't touch her, didn't crowd her, just let her feel what she needed to feel. When she finally managed a shaky breath, he said, "Come, I'll show you your room." "Your room? Not the barn? Not the floor? Not the corner?" He led her to a small room just off the main one. The door creaked softly as he pushed it open. Inside waited a neatly made bed, with real sheets, a thick quilt, and 2 pillows, a small dresser, a wash basin, a braided rug on the floor, and by the window, a wooden chair with a folded set of clothes resting on it. "I didn't know your measurements," Nate said, rubbing the back of his neck. "So I asked the seamstress to guess. They might be a bit large." Abigail ran her hand over the fabric, a soft wool dress in a dusty blue color. Her favorite color. Her mother's favorite color, too. "How did you—" "You wore a ribbon in that shade at last year's harvest fair," he said quietly, "when you danced with Mrs. Fisher's grandson." Her heart lurched. You saw that?" He nodded once. "Before everything changed at home." She pressed her fingers to her lips, overwhelmed that he'd remembered something she had forgotten she'd ever worn. "You don't owe me anything," Nate added, almost awkward. "This room is yours for as long as you need it." "No one has ever given me a room before," she whispered. "Not like this." "It isn't a gift," he said. "It's respect." The word hit her harder than any slap her father had ever delivered. Respect. She sank onto the edge of the bed, fingers twisting in the quilt. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to," he replied. "Rest. I'll bring up hot water so you can wash if you want." She nodded, blinking back tears. When the door closed behind him, she let herself cry silently, tears of exhaustion, fear, relief, everything tangled together. Then she wiped her face, drew a steady breath, and went to the wash basin. There were soaps lined up, a bar of lavender, one of pine, another mint-scented. She chose lavender, breathing in the scent as memories of her mother washed through her. She bathed, changed into the dress, and when she looked at herself in the small mirror, she didn't see the girl from the auction block. She saw someone beginning again. When Abigail stepped back into the main room, Nate was by the hearth, stirring a pot with a wooden spoon. He glanced at her and paused. His eyes swept from the loose blue dress to her still damp curls resting on her shoulders. He didn't stare in a hungry way, nor in pity, but he did look at her. Really look. "You look more comfortable," he said finally. Her cheeks warmed. "The dress fits perfectly." "Good." He handed her a bowl. "Dinner will help you get your strength back." She sat opposite him at the table. The stew was thicker than the one from the road, full of potatoes, venison, carrots, and herbs. She closed her eyes as she tasted it. "This is wonderful. Glad you like it." "Did you cook like this for her?" Abigail asked softly. Nate didn't pretend not to understand. "Caroline liked cooking. I helped. After she died, I kept doing it because someone has to." "I can cook," Abigail said quickly. "Very well, actually. Mama taught me everything she knew. I can take over if—" "You don't need to take over anything," Nate said gently. "But if you want to cook sometimes, that's fine." "I do," she admitted. "I like feeding people." Something warm flickered in his eyes. "Then feed me," he said, "when you want to." They ate in quiet comfort. After dinner, Abigail helped gather the dishes. She carried them to the basin, but Nate's voice stopped her. "You've traveled 2 days straight. Sit. I'll clean up." "But you should rest," he said firmly. "Tomorrow you can help. Tonight, let me handle it." She sank into the chair, unsure how to exist in a place where kindness didn't demand repayment. While Nate washed the dishes, Abigail looked around again, at the shelves, the handmade furniture, the dried herbs hanging from the beams. This wasn't the house of a man avoiding life. This was the home of a man who had once built a future and lost it, and never expected to build another. When he finished, he said, "I'll be outside splitting wood. If you need anything, call." "Splitting wood? After all day riding?" "Needs doing," he said simply. "Winter comes early up here." He moved toward the door until her voice stopped him. "Nate?" He turned. "Thank you," she said softly, "for bringing me here, for everything." He nodded once. "You're safe here." The door closed, and Abigail pressed her trembling hands against her chest, because no one had ever said those words to her and meant them. The first week in Nate's cabin passed like something out of a dream Abigail didn't trust enough to believe in. Morning sunlight stretched across wooden floors as she cooked breakfast, the scent of rising bread mixed with pine smoke. Nate returned from checking traps with snow-dusted shoulders, and a quiet nod meant just for her. In the evenings, they read by the hearth, her voice warming the cabin as she recited stories aloud, Nate sanding a wooden handle or carving something she couldn't yet see the shape of. It was gentle, predictable, safe, and that was the most dangerous feeling of all. Every day she caught herself waiting, for the moment safety cracked open and revealed another trap. Her father had taught her that comfort was always followed by a blow. That kindness always carried a price. So when the knock came at the door one cold morning, her body stiffened instinctively. They weren't expecting anyone. No neighbors lived close enough to drop by. No hunters passed this way unless they were lost. And the knock wasn't tentative. It was loud, sharp, purposeful. Nate, sitting at the table sharpening his knife, went still, not frightened, but alert. Quiet sharpened him. He stood, motioned for Abigail to stay behind him, and approached the door. The second knock hit harder. "I said stay behind me," Nate murmured, voice low but steady. She whispered, "Abigail." His tone brooked no argument. She obeyed. Nate unbolted the door and swung it open. A gust of cold wind burst inside. On the porch stood Sheriff Arnold Fitch, his oilskin coat dripping melted frost, his boots muddy, his eyes narrowed with purpose. Behind him, 2 deputies lingered like wolves waiting for a signal. Abigail's stomach dropped. The sheriff's gaze flicked past Nate, landing on her like a nail. She instinctively folded her arms over herself, though she wasn't cold. "Well," Fitch drawled, "looks like the rumors are true. You brought home Blackwell's girl." Nate didn't move. "Her name is Abigail Hartley." "Sure," the sheriff said, smirking, "if that helps you sleep at night." Nate's voice stayed quiet, which was always more dangerous. "What do you want, Fitch?" "We've had complaints," Fitch said, leaning on a post like he owned the front porch. "Blackwell says you interfered in a lawful contract." "No contract is lawful when the woman being sold didn't consent," Nate replied. Fitch snorted. "This is Wyoming territory, Cordell. Things are lawful when men with money say they are." One of the deputies chuckled. Abigail's heart hammered. She stepped closer to Nate without meaning to, her fingers brushing the back of his coat. The sheriff's eyes caught the movement. "Well, well, seems she's already gotten used to you." Nate's jaw flexed. "Say what you came to say." "The girl is property under a 10-year labor bond," Fitch said. "Her father signed the papers. Blackwell owns the rights. You stole from him. That's a punishable offense." Abigail gasped softly. Nate didn't blink. "I paid Blackwell $150. "For the girl, sure," Fitch said. "But there's another matter. Turns out her father claims she owes him money. Says she ran off with family assets." "That's a lie," Abigail burst out before she could stop herself. "He sold me. He didn't give me a penny. I have nothing." "Quiet, girl," the sheriff snapped. Before she could shrink back, Nate stepped sideways, blocking her from the sheriff's view. His voice was iron. "You don't raise your voice at her, not in my home." Fitch's smile thinned. "You forget, Cordell. You don't get to decide what happens here." "This isn't town," Nate said. "This is my land." The air tightened. Deputy Hall shifted his rifle. "Sheriff, maybe we should—" "No," Fitch cut him off. "We're doing this clean." He crossed his arms. "We're here to retrieve the girl. Bring her out, and we'll resolve the rest civilly." Nate laughed once, a sound like a blade sharpening. "She's not going anywhere with you." The sheriff's eyes hardened. "If you harbor her, it becomes kidnapping." "She isn't a child," Nate said, "and she's not being held. She stays because she wants to." Fitch scoffed. "Does she now? Or are you coaxing her with that pretty cabin and the promise of a bed?" Blood boiled in Abigail's ears. She took a step forward, trembling but furious. "Sheriff Fitch, I'm not property, not Blackwell's, not my father's, and not yours to remove." The sheriff turned a cold gaze on her. "Girl, you don't understand how the world works. Men make agreements. Women follow them." "No," Nate said flatly, "not here." Fitch looked from Nate to Abigail, to the cabin behind them, and his expression soured. "This ain't finished. You hear me? Blackwell isn't letting this slide, and Hartley wants his debts paid." Nate's voice dropped into something low and dangerous. "If either of them comes near her again, they'll regret it." The sheriff stepped back. "Is that a threat?" "It's a warning." For a long beat, no one moved. Then the sheriff spat into the dirt. "We'll be back, Cordell, with papers and men enough to take what we need." He turned sharply, striding toward his horse, deputies following. One of them cast Abigail a pitying look before mounting. Within moments, the men were gone, swallowed by the white pines. Silence fell heavy. Nate closed the door carefully, not slamming it, not muttering curses, just breathing slow, steady breaths like a man putting his anger back behind its iron bars. Abigail stood in the middle of the room, shaking. "They're going to come back," she whispered. "I know. They're going to take me." "No," Nate said. "They won't." "How can you be sure?" He turned to her. "Because you're not alone, Abigail. Not anymore." Her throat tightened. "I'm afraid." "I know," he said again, voice softening. "But fear doesn't decide our future." "What if they bring papers? What if the law says—" "Law isn't always justice," Nate said, "and it sure as hell isn't truth out here." She pressed her fist to her chest, trying to breathe past the ache. "I don't want to be sold again." "You won't be." He stepped closer, not touching her, but near enough she felt his heat. "I will stand between you and the whole damn territory if I have to." Her breath hitched. "Why?" "Because you deserve better than the life they tried to force on you." A tear fell before she could stop it. Nate caught it gently with his thumb, and for the first time since they'd met, she leaned into him, just lightly, just enough. And he didn't pull away. He let her. He stayed with her until the trembling stopped. Outside, the mountains waited in silence. Inside, Abigail realized something terrifying and beautiful. Nate wasn't just protecting her, he was choosing her. Every day, every breath, every battle that was coming. Snow had begun to fall again, thin, drifting flakes that floated lazily past the cabin windows as if the world itself were trying to soften what was coming. But nothing could soften the dread building in Abigail's chest. For 3 days after the sheriff's visit, Nate moved like a man preparing for war. He tightened every hinge on the shutters, checked every rifle, split twice the usual firewood, reinforced the doorframe with thick beams of pine. He didn't say he was preparing because of her. He didn't need to. Every strike of his axe said it for him. Abigail helped where she could, patching blankets, boiling water, stacking food, but the knot in her stomach only grew. On the 4th morning, the trouble came, not with a knock, with the thunder of hooves. 4 riders crested the ridge, Sheriff Fitch in his dark coat, 2 deputies behind him, and Samuel Blackwell himself, riding a sleek black stallion. Blackwell looked exactly as Abigail remembered, sharp mustache, polished boots, and a smile like a man born believing the world owed him everything. "Nate," she whispered from inside the cabin, "I see them." Nate's voice was steady. He loaded a final shell into his rifle, then turned to her. "Stay behind me, no matter what happens." She didn't argue. He stepped out onto the porch, rifle resting across his arms in a casual posture that somehow made it even more intimidating. The men dismounted. Sheriff Fitch tipped his hat. "Cordell, I gave you time to think." "I didn't need any," Nate replied. Blackwell stepped forward, smirking. "I want my property returned." "She isn't property." Blackwell waved a hand dismissively. "Her father sold her labor bond. She's under contract. And since she ran off, that adds interest. I expect compensation." "She didn't run," Nate said. "I bought her contract from you, remember?" Blackwell's smile turned venomous. "For 150, yes. But after further review, I decided the fair price is 300. "You doubled the price after accepting my payment," Nate said. "That's not law. That's greed." "Call it what you want," Blackwell snapped. "Pay the balance or hand over the girl. I'll take either." Abigail flinched behind the doorway. The sheriff crossed his arms. "This can end easy, Cordell, or hard." Nate didn't blink. "There's only one way it ends. She stays here." Blackwell's face darkened. Cordell, you don't understand. That girl is worth money. She works slow, eats too much, complains too much. She's a loss unless I sell her. Her father said I could do whatever necessary to get my payment. Nate's jaw bulged. Abigail watched his fingers tighten on the rifle stock. Say one more thing about her, Nate said quietly, and you'll regret it. Fitch stepped forward. Enough. We're taking her. Move aside. No. The word hung in the cold air like a blade. Deputy Hall reached for his revolver. Sheriff? Fitch hesitated. The law didn't matter here, not really. Not when facing a man like Nate Cordell on his own land. But Blackwell was not built for hesitation. He lunged forward. If you won't give her up, Nate raised his rifle, not firing, only pointing, but it was enough to stop the world. Blackwell, Nate warned, take one more step and I swear, shoot me then, Blackwell barked, spreading his arms. You'll hang for it and she'll still be mine. From inside the doorway, Abigail suddenly stepped out. Nate. Her voice was shaking, but she walked to his side anyway. Nate's eyes widened. Abigail, get back. No, she whispered. Her hand, trembling but determined, gripped the back of his coat. She turned to Blackwell. You don't own me, not any more. Blackwell laughed. I own the paper that says I do. You own a signature written by a desperate, broken man, she said, not a human being. You're a bond worker, he snarled. No, I'm a woman, and I choose to stay here. Blackwell's face twisted in disgust. With him, a widower hermit? You think he loves you? He's keeping you fed because you're useful. Once he gets what he wants from you, you'll be out in the cold again. A shot cracked through the air. Every head snapped toward Nate's rifle, but Nate hadn't fired. A bullet embedded itself in the post beside Blackwell's boot, close enough to send splinters flying. Nate lowered his smoking pistol. His left-hand draw had been so fast none of them had seen it. That's your only warning, he growled. The sheriff swallowed hard. Cordell, put the gun down. Then leave, Nate said. Blackwell stepped backward, pale now, fury shaking his voice. This isn't over. I'll return with the judge, with more men, with the law. You bring whoever you want, Nate said. She still won't be yours. The sheriff grabbed Blackwell's arm. We're leaving. The men mounted their horses and turned back toward the ridge. As they disappeared among the pines, Abigail sagged, her knees giving into fear she'd finally allowed to show. Nate caught her before she hit the ground. Abigail, I've got you. She pressed her forehead to his chest, breath trembling, tears hot in her eyes. They'll come back. Nate rested his hand on the back of her head. Then let them. I'm not giving you up. Why? Her voice cracked. Why risk your life for me? He lifted her chin, his gaze fierce and unguarded. Because you're no one's property, he said. You're someone He stopped himself, but she heard enough. Her heart thudded against his. Nate, she whispered. He cupped her face with his rough hands. I will stand between you and every danger this world holds, not because I bought you, because I choose you. Her breath caught, and in that moment, snow falling softly around them, the threat of danger still echoing across the ridge, Abigail realized the truth she had feared to hope for. Nate wasn't just protecting her, he was beginning to love her. Dusk settled over the mountains like a slow exhale. The riders were long gone. Nothing left of them but hoof prints and the lingering scent of gunpowder in the cold air. But the fear they brought still pulsed through Abigail's veins. Inside the cabin, Nate lit the lanterns one by one, their warm glow pushing back the edges of darkness. Abigail sat on the rug near the hearth, hands wrapped around a mug of tea she hadn't touched. Silence stretched between them, not cold, not distant, just heavy, full of unspoken things. Nate finally set his rifle on the table and lowered himself onto the floor across from her. He didn't touch her. He didn't crowd her. He simply waited until she was ready. She wasn't sure she ever would be. "They'll come back," Abigail whispered, staring into the fire, "with more men, with papers, with the law." "I know," Nate said, "and you'll be the one punished, not them." "I know." Her voice wavered, but she kept going. "You could lose your land, your reputation, your freedom, because of me." "Not because of you," Nate corrected softly. "Because of them." Abigail squeezed her eyes shut. "Nate, you should let me go." His breath caught, quiet but unmistakable. "No, you don't understand," she pushed on. "If I go back, the sheriff will leave you alone. Blackwell will get what he wants. My father will sign whatever he needs to. None of them will hurt you." "Abigail, look at me." She didn't. So Nate moved closer, just enough that his knee brushed hers. Her breath hitched. He reached out and gently tilted her chin until their eyes met. "No one," he said slowly, "is taking you from this cabin. Not the sheriff, not Blackwell, not your father, and not even you." Her voice cracked. "Why? Why are you fighting so hard?" Nate dragged a hand over his jaw, as if searching for words he hadn't spoken in years. "Because for 8 years I've lived like a dead man walking," he said quietly. "I worked, I hunted, I slept, but I didn't feel anything, not grief, not hope, not anger, nothing." His thumb brushed her cheek, barely there, but it stole her breath. "And then I saw you," he continued, "on that auction platform, terrified, alone, belittled, and something inside me woke up. Something fierce, something alive." Abigail's lips parted, but no sound came out. "I brought you here to keep you safe," Nate said. "But somewhere along the way, I realized I don't want this cabin without you in it." Her heart stumbled. "And today," he added, voice roughening, "when you stepped outside and stood beside me, Abigail, I swear I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Tears filled her eyes. "I was terrified." "I know," he murmured, "but I wasn't terrified of them." She swallowed hard. "I was terrified of losing this." Nate's breath hitched. "This?" he whispered. "You," she corrected, voice trembling. That broke whatever last barrier he'd been holding. Nate leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers, breath mixing with hers, warm in the cold cabin. "You're safe here," he said, the words low and intimate. "It's your home now, if you'll have it." A tear slipped down her cheek. "I want it," she whispered. "No," Nate said, brushing the tear away with his thumb. "I want to hear you say it clearly." She drew in a shaky breath. "I want this home," she said. "I want this life, and I want you." For a heartbeat, they simply breathed together. Then Nate cupped her face and kissed her, not with urgency, but with reverence, as if she were something fragile he'd been entrusted to guard. The kiss deepened slowly, naturally, like something long overdue. Abigail's fingers curled into his shirt, pulling him closer. Nate wrapped his arms around her, holding her as though the world outside could not touch them. And for the first time since she'd been sold at that market, Abigail felt safe enough to believe in tomorrow. Some stories begin with cruelty, some with fear, and some with a girl standing on a wooden platform believing no one would ever choose her. But the stories that stay with us, the ones we carry long after the fire dies down, are the stories where someone decides to stand between another human being and the darkness chasing them. If you're still here, listening from wherever you are, a quiet room, a long bus ride, a late night shift, know this. Your comments remind me that stories connect hearts across mountains and oceans. Tell me, where are you listening from tonight? And if you still believe in love that protects the broken, don't go far. The next story is already on its way.